Cleopatra, the Serpent and the Scepter, dramatized from her own perspective. Episode 1. I was born in the palace at Alexandria, a mosaic of light dancing along marble floors, columns rising to the sky like silent guardians, and the insistent pulse of the sea beyond the harbour walls. I do not recall my earliest cries, naturally. Yet I sometimes wonder if, in my first breath, the salt of the Mediterranean touched my tongue. My father, Ptolemy XII, though they called him Orlaits, the flutist, claimed lineage from Alexander's general, but we were more Greek than Egyptian, more foreign than native to these sands. Still, my blood carried both heritages. The Nile, the desert, and the pantheon of Egyptian gods cradled me in their mysteries, even as I grew up speaking Greek and studying the works of Homer. I was Cleopatra, named for the tradition of my house, Cleopatra the seventh Philopator, if the scribes are exact. My father was a curious man, prone to bursts of extravagant spending, fearful of conspirators, and often a way to secure Roman favor. His throne was always precarious because our dynasty had begun to slip in the eyes of the people. The Romans loomed over us as a rising power, casting long shadows across the blue sea. One day, I must have been 6 or 7, I remember I was learning languages with a tutor, a serious man with deep-set eyes, who insisted I read aloud Greek texts and repeat them in Egyptian. All I wanted was to escape, to run through the corridors, to climb into the library's hidden alcoves and inhale the scent of papyrus rolls. Yet my father insisted that I gain mastery over words. Cleopatra, he told me in a rare moment of fatherly sternness, do not let your tongue be the chain that enslaves you to others. Learn their languages, then the world will be no stranger to you. I heeded him. By the time I was a young woman, I could speak Egyptian, Greek, Latin, and a scattering of other tongues. That skill would become my greatest gift, surpassing jewels or any ephemeral finery. In my 8th year, the palace halls rang with trouble. Whispers about my eldest sister, Berenice, caught in plots to undermine father's reign. He was absent so frequently, travelling to Rome or seeking allies among the wealthy, that discontent simmered. Berenice was older, ambitious, and those with their own ends to serve whispered to her that the city needed a true ruler who cared not for pandering to foreign powers. I recall the day palace guards seized me by the arm, not unkindly, but firmly enough. My mother was nowhere to be found, a ghostly figure in my memory, so little do I recall her. My heart pounded. I feared Berenice had extended her net over me, but it was father's men. Your father commands you stay in your chambers until it is safe, a guard said. Safe from what? But the what soon manifested. Berenice forced her claim in Alexandria's public square. There were wild cheers from people who despised father's habit of raising taxes to pay Roman debts. Within days, he was deposed, forced into exile. I do not recall precisely how I was spared, but Berenice decided to keep me in the palace. Perhaps I was too young to threaten her. Or perhaps she had pangs of conscience for her little sister, though that seems unlikely in hindsight. She declared herself sole monarch. For 3 years, Berenice wore the crown and grew drunk on power, while father appealed to Rome. I was 11 when he returned, financed by Roman gold and escorted by Roman soldiers. The siege of my city was terrifying. I remember the vibrations in the floor each time a battering ram struck our walls. Smoke stained the shimmering sky. I trembled, pressing myself against a stone balustrade. Already, rumors said that Berenice's end would be brutal. Once inside, father seized her and executed her publicly. She, once so regal and commanding, lost her head to the axe in the palace courtyard. I can still hear the thud and the sudden hush of onlookers. I wept in secret. Though she had turned on our father, she was still my sister, the bright presence I remembered brushing my hair when I was small. Perhaps it was that moment, seeing her body, lifeless on the marble, that hammered home the lethal truth of power. Mercy was not a word rulers often used, and if I wanted to survive in my family's court, I had to learn that lesson well. Father reclaimed his throne. Alexandria returned to relative calm, but the city's soul was uneasy. Father was in deeper debt to the Romans now, and our people were more resentful than ever. Still, life in the palace had its charm. Great banquets to impress visiting dignitaries, lavish processions where we displayed our royalty in gilded chariots drawn by white horses through the city streets. In private, my father employed the best tutors, not just for me, but for my younger brothers and sisters, Arsinoe, Ptolemy the 13th, and Ptolemy the 14th. I grew close to them in ways only siblings in a nest of vipers can. We conspired with each other in mischief, though always carefully. The palace was riddled with spies. Every slip of the tongue might end in a rumor that spelled one's doom. Father's reign grew more precarious. The Roman general Pompey grew in influence, overshadowing the Senate. Julius Caesar was another name that began to echo across the sea, though I knew little of him, only that he was a rising star, a man of grand ambition. I devoured any stories the traveling merchants brought of Roman intrigues. A triumvirate had formed: Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Rome was on the verge of boiling over, everyone said. In my girlish imagination, it was a land of unstoppable armies, iron discipline, and cunning men who might set their eyes upon Egypt if it suited them. Then, in 51 BC, father died. I was just 17. The cause was rumored to be a complication of his fragile health. Some rumored poison, but who can say? The old man's face was bloated in death, and I felt both sadness and relief. His passing left me alone, but also free. According to his will, I was to co-rule with my brother Ptolemy the 13th, a child 2 or 3 years my junior, though we were bound to wed, per our custom. A strange tradition, yes, but the Ptolemies had long intermarried siblings to keep the bloodline pure. The truth, of course, was that it was simply a veneer for consolidating power. I was wise enough not to fight this tradition openly, for it would have cost me the throne. From the moment I donned the diadem, I felt the weight of expectation. The city's high priest performed the rituals, proclaiming me Pharaoh in the old Egyptian style, while scribes noted that I was the first of my family to truly speak the language of the land. "I am Cleopatra," I said in Egyptian during the ceremony, and that simple line sparked murmurs of surprise and approval. I was determined not to be a figurehead. I would not vanish behind lesser men. This realm would be mine to govern, mine to shape. But if I had illusions of an easy rule, the court soon disabused me. A coterie of advisers to my brother, led by the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achillas, believed I should be relegated to the background. Ptolemy was not yet a man, but they saw in him a pliable figure. In me, they saw a threat. Tensions in the palace soared. I found allies among the old guard who remembered my father's last instructions, but my brother's clique had the advantage of cunning. Soon, court gossip turned sour. Coining my name alone as Queen Cleopatra in official documents fueled their ire. Letters of mine to foreign dignitaries praising our monarchy without referencing Ptolemy the 13th enraged them. In a decisive blow, they orchestrated a power grab, effectively forcing me to flee Alexandria for my safety. I left by night, accompanied by a handful of loyal guards. We rushed to Thebes, then further south, gathering a small force. It was a jolt. One moment I was enthroned, the next exiled. I steeled myself, recalling Berenice's fate. Power was life in this world. If I lost the throne, I was as good as dead. With my band of men, I prepared for war. That is where the next chapter of my life truly began. I would reclaim what was mine, or I would perish. Yet even as I gathered soldiers, I understood that I was only one piece on the wider board. For Rome was now in a great civil war of its own, Caesar against Pompey. My father's debts and alliances were tangled with Pompey, yet Caesar was on the rise, having crossed the Rubicon. My sense told me that Caesar's star was ascendant. If I could present myself to Caesar as a worthy ally, perhaps I could secure the advantage I needed. Opportunity came swiftly. Pompey, fleeing Caesar after a series of defeats, arrived on Egyptian shores. Ptolemy the 13th's advisers, hoping to curry Caesar's favor, decided to murder Pompey upon his landing, presenting Caesar with the severed head of his rival. They believed Caesar would thank them. They gravely miscalculated. Soon, Caesar came in pursuit, entered Alexandria, and was greeted by the grisly trophy of Pompey's head. Witnesses told me how Caesar's face twisted in revulsion. Pompey had once been his friend, his son-in-law. Even if they were now enemies, he considered this murder a dishonorable act. Thus, Caesar seized Alexandria, intent on arbitrating the dispute between me and my brother. But Ptolemy's forces turned against Caesar, seeing him as an invader. The city became a battleground. In a swirl of confusion, I saw my chance. If Caesar was there, if he intended to judge between us, I must ensure that I, not my brother, captured his sympathy. But how to pass the blockade around the palace? Caesar was lodged in the royal quarters, carefully guarded. My advisers whispered half a dozen plans to me, each riskier than the last. At last, we devised a daring ruse. I had myself wrapped in a rug or a bed sack. Stories differ, but the gist is the same. And my loyal servant Apollodorus carried me across the palace gates as a gift. I was terrified inside that cramped roll of cloth. I could scarcely breathe, but if I was discovered, I would be killed instantly. Then, after what felt like hours, there was a murmur of voices, footsteps, and I was placed gently on a floor of polished stone. "Lord Caesar," I heard Apollodorus announce, "I bring a gift for you from Queen Cleopatra." Then the cloth unrolled. My hair tumbled down, and I emerged, blinking in the lamplight. I felt my heart pounding as I rose, offering a bow, trying to appear regal despite my cramped limbs. Julius Caesar stood there, tall for a Roman, with a sharply lined face and a commanding posture. His eyes widened, and then, to my relief, he smiled. I spoke to him in low, earnest tones. I introduced myself in Latin, explaining who I was and how I had come to be exiled by my brother. He listened, a curious warmth in his demeanor. "Your cunning does you credit," he said at last with a faint grin. "You are bold, Cleopatra." He paused and added, "I like boldness." That night I conversed with him at length, weaving the story of my father's last will, of the Roman debts, of how Ptolemy's advisers sought to sideline me. Caesar listened with a statesman's bearing, occasionally tapping a finger on the table. I caught glimpses of his shrewd nature. He was not a man easily manipulated. But I was determined to make myself indispensable. He agreed to mediate. The next day my brother burst into the palace, outraged that I stood beside Caesar in open court. The scowling Pothinus, seeing me, hissed some insult in Greek under his breath, and Achillas glowered from a distance. Caesar declared that Ptolemy and I would both rule, as father's testament stated, and that the conflict must end. But Ptolemy and his men would not accept. They retreated in anger, rallying their troops. The lines of war had been drawn again, this time in the very heart of Alexandria. Chaos engulfed the city. The so-called Alexandrian War began, with Caesar's legionaries entrenched in the palace quarter. Fires raged through the harbor as ships clashed. My heart felt torn. I loved my city, and to see it bleed and burn was agony. But I also knew I could not yield. Caesar needed me as an ally, for we had resources and strategic worth. In one instance, Achillas attempted to seize the great library by force. Flames licked the sky, threatening the priceless collection. Legend would later say part of the library burned at this time. If it did, it was a grievous blow to knowledge itself. The city was in uproar for months. We lived under siege, the restless clash of steel echoing in corridors. I took counsel with Caesar daily, learning how Romans campaigned, how they negotiated alliances. My nights, sometimes, I spent in Caesar's chambers. We had become lovers. An arrangement of passion, yes, but also of political necessity. Perhaps I enthralled him with my knowledge and wit. Perhaps he enthralled me with his aura of power and ambition. It was an alliance forged in the crucible of war. I did not delude myself. Caesar was a Roman. His first loyalty was to Rome, but for that fleeting moment, we found synergy in each other's arms. Eventually, reinforcements arrived for Caesar, and the tide turned against Ptolemy the 13th. A final battle took place by the Nile, or so the chroniclers say. My brother drowned in the river, weighed down by his armor as his forces scattered. My heart should have thundered with triumph, but part of me grieved. He had been a boy I once played with in the palace halls, yet fate was merciless, and thus I was restored as queen, now to rule alongside another brother, Ptolemy the 14th, though he was but a child. But Caesar remained my strongest ally. Not long after, to seal our bond, we embarked on a trip along the Nile. Caesar was eager to see the wonders of Egypt, the towering statues of Abu Simbel, the labyrinth at Hawara. I arranged a magnificent barge so the Roman general might sail in comfort. Musicians played, incense perfumed the air, and we feasted on delicacies. It was part courtship, part spectacle. I wanted him to understand the grandeur of the land I ruled, to revere it as I did. I remember him marveling at the colossal statues of ancient pharaohs carved into stone. "Your people have built for eternity," he whispered. I, for my part, let him know I was not some puppet. I was determined that Egypt would remain sovereign. He saw my passion, my refusal to be overshadowed, and in those golden sunsets on the Nile we conceived a child, Caesarion, though he was not born until we returned to Alexandria. I dared hope that with Caesar's patronage my reign would be strong and unchallenged, that our son might unite two worlds. Those days on the river were among the happiest in my life. I felt powerful, in love, afloat on an endless horizon. Still, the future was uncertain. Caesar was called back to Rome in haste to stamp out the last embers of Pompeian resistance. I parted with him in the harbor. "Come to me soon," he said. "Bring our child when he is born." I touched his cheek, nodding. And then he boarded a Roman ship, sails billowing, leaving me on the quay. The gulls called overhead, and I felt the old ache. Power had demanded I give my heart to this man, but in truth I had also given him more. I was Cleopatra. I would not kneel before any mortal. Yet for him I had opened my soul, just a sliver. I consolidated power. Arsinoe, my younger sister, had sided with Ptolemy during the siege. She was captured, then allowed to live, though Caesar eventually took her to Rome. I married my little brother, Ptolemy the 14th, per our custom, though he was still a boy. I believed he was no threat, but I never let my guard down. Meanwhile, Caesar's statue was erected in the harbor, and I oversaw the rebuilding of what had been destroyed in the war. Alexandria was battered, but resilient. Trade returned. The lighthouse remained a shining beacon, and I waited for news from Rome. Perhaps I should have known that storms brewed there. Caesar had himself named dictator for life. Powerful men in the Senate grew uneasy, some calling him tyrant. I continued to correspond, sending letters and gifts, anxious for updates. Then came word that he had arranged a splendid villa for me in Rome, so I might visit. Summoning my courage, I took my infant son, Caesarion, and we sailed for the center of the republic that shaped the known world. Episode 2. My first impression of Rome was one of marvel and caution. The city sprawled across 7 hills, a grand mosaic of temples and bustling forums. The Tiber snaked through it like a sleepy serpent. Everywhere I looked, I saw togas, stern-faced senators, triumphant arches. My retinue and I caused quite a stir upon our arrival. Exotic Egyptians with dark eyes and flowing robes, servants bearing ornaments of gold and lapis lazuli. Romans were curious, even suspicious. I wore my pride like a cloak, determined not to appear a supplicant. I was a queen. Caesar housed me in a sumptuous villa across the Tiber, away from the Senate's prying eyes. Yet his invitation to me was also a gamble for him. Whispers in the city abounded. Caesar was enthralled by an Eastern queen, the mother of his illegitimate child. Many of his allies frowned upon the spectacle of a foreign monarch living so openly in Rome. They saw it as a challenge to Roman mores, to the sanctity of Roman marriage, for Caesar had a wife, and to the idea that no king or queen should overshadow the republic. I soon learned how complicated Roman politics were. Caesar had enemies in the Senate, Brutus, Cassius, and others, men who despised any whiff of monarchy. Rumors swirled that Caesar meant to proclaim himself king. My presence only gave more fuel to such fears. I recall a tense feast one evening where Caesar introduced me to a group of senators. One of them, a hawk-eyed man named Simba, gave me a cold once-over. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing stiffly, "how does Egypt treat traitors?" His tone was more jab than question. "We do not treat them with half measures," I replied, smiling just as coolly. Caesar gently guided me away, his jaw set. Such was the subtle hostility that hovered around us. Despite this undercurrent, Caesar displayed me and Caesarion proudly. He erected a golden statue of me in the temple of Venus Genetrix, honoring me as a descendant of the goddess. Or so he proclaimed publicly. It was an astonishing show of favor. Unprecedented, really, and it only inflamed whispers further. In private, Caesar and I discussed how we might forge a future. He had grand plans for expansion, for campaigns in Parthia. We talked of combining Rome's might with Egypt's wealth. "If the Senate names me King of Rome," he mused one night, eyes glowing with ambition, "we can unite our worlds." Yet he said it with a half-laugh, as though uncertain whether to confide in me or test me. I felt a rush of both excitement and foreboding. The Romans, I knew, had once cast out their own kings centuries ago. Monarchy was an abomination to them. Meanwhile, I strolled the streets occasionally, veiled so as not to draw a crowd, though Romans often recognized me. Sometimes they simply stared, uncertain whether to gape at me as a marvel or spit in disapproval. I visited the Forum, listening to orators and reading inscriptions on monuments. I saw the seeds of greatness in Rome's institutions, but also a certain rigidity. The city was bursting with tensions. Caesar's godlike status among the people was at odds with the senatorial elite's sense of tradition. Something had to break. In March of 44 BC, it did. The day started like any other, the city stirring with commerce and chatter. Caesar was to attend a Senate meeting in Pompey's theatre. I was in the villa with Caesarion, fussing over papyrus accounts from Alexandria. I had a strange sense of unease. Caesar had left earlier than usual, brushing a kiss on my cheek, telling me he would return soon to discuss pressing matters. Hours later, a messenger arrived, face pale as chalk, sweat beading on his brow. I rushed into the atrium. "What has happened? Speak!" He stammered. "Caesar, he's been attacked in the Senate. They stabbed him. Many times. He is dead." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. I grabbed a pillar to steady myself. The messenger bowed his head, tears in his eyes. "They say Brutus, Cassius, and the others did it. They called it the Ides of March, a righteous act against tyranny. Dead. Julius Caesar." My mind reeled. I pictured the strong man who had conquered Gaul, who had braved the Alexandrian War, now lying in a pool of blood among the senators. My stomach turned. For a moment I could not breathe. Then I thought of my child. Caesarion. His father was gone. And what of me? I was in a city that might turn on me at any instant. I looked at Caesarion, so small, his eyes reflecting my fear, and I resolved that I would not crumble. That night, the city seethed. Some hailed Caesar's assassins as liberators, while others mourned the fallen leader. Riots broke out. I realized I was in mortal danger if the conspirators decided to rid themselves of Caesar's foreign mistress too. Mark Antony, Caesar's ally, warned me to remain discreet. "Leave Rome if you can," he advised, meeting me in secret. He was a large man, with a boldness in his manner, though heartbreak and fury flickered in his eyes. "I do not trust the Senate's next move. You and the boy, your targets." I wasted no time. Under the cover of darkness, I departed, gathering my retinue and sailing back to Alexandria. My heart was a storm of grief and anger. The man who had championed me, the father of my son, was gone, struck down by daggers in a realm that prided itself on law and order. When we reached the sea, I remember standing on the deck, the salt wind buffeting my face. I stared back in the direction of Rome, tears stinging my eyes. "I will avenge you," I whispered, or perhaps I vowed to avenge myself, because truly Caesar's death left me and my child vulnerable. My place in the Roman puzzle was shattered, and all my hopes for a grand alliance evaporated. Back in Alexandria, I retook the reins of my kingdom with renewed vigor. My brother-husband, Ptolemy XIV, died not long after. Some suspect poison, though I shall not confirm or deny. It was convenient. He was not well liked, and I could not risk him being used against me by Roman or Egyptian factions. I named Caesarion as my co-ruler. Ptolemy 15 Caesar, I announced him to the people, though I called him Caesarion in private. He was my anchor, my legacy. Any who served me now must acknowledge him as the rightful heir. The months after Caesar's death were filled with uncertainty. Rome fell into civil war again. Antony and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, hunted down the assassins, then formed a triumvirate with Lepidus. I observed from afar, carefully measuring each new power shift. My treasury was strong, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and Rome's new masters knew they might need me. Meanwhile, I performed my duty as queen, honoring Egyptian traditions, presiding over festivals, ensuring the populace saw me as a rightful pharaoh. I gave audiences to my people, dressed in the robes of Isis, speaking their language, showing them I was no foreign usurper. My popularity rose. They said Cleopatra was beloved of the people. Though palace intrigue was ever present, I could not afford to be complacent. It was in this tense environment that Mark Antony summoned me to Tarsus in 41 BC. The triumvirate had defeated the assassins at Philippi, but the union of Antony and Octavian was fragile. Antony governed the East, including dealings with Egypt. I considered ignoring his summons. After all, I was Cleopatra, a sovereign queen. But ignoring a Roman triumvir would be unwise, especially one with legions at his command. Besides, I was curious about Antony. I recalled his rugged charm from our brief meeting in Rome. Now he was one of the most powerful men in the world. Perhaps an alliance would be beneficial. So I prepared for a grand spectacle. I wanted to remind him, and the world, of the wealth and majesty of Egypt. I had my ship gilded, its sails dyed purple, oars of silver. Perfumes wafted in the breeze as we sailed to Tarsus, with musicians playing melodies. Plutarch would later write that the barge's sails were so fragrant that the winds carried the scent to shore before the ship was even visible. I wanted Antony to see that I was no meek subordinate. I was Cleopatra, the woman who had tamed Julius Caesar. When we arrived at Tarsus, Antony had arranged a lavish reception in the city, but I sent word that I would host him on my vessel instead. This was a subtle power move. I would not go to him. He must come to me. Gossip spread that Antony was intrigued and a bit irked, but his curiosity won out, and he came aboard. I received him in a pavilion decorated like a mythic shrine. We dined on golden couches, feasting on roasted meats, fruits, and the best wines. The air was filled with incense, the music of lyres, and the gentle lap of water against the hull. "Queen Cleopatra," he greeted, inclining his head with a playful smirk. "I see rumors of your splendor were understated." "And I see rumors of your boldness were not," I returned, eyes sparkling. "But boldness does not always equate to victory, my lord. Shall we talk of how we might both prosper?" He laughed, a deep, resonant sound. "You speak as though I might be your student." "We are all students of power," I said, leaning forward. "Or are you content to let Octavian overshadow you?" I watched the flicker of irritation in his gaze at the mention of Octavian. "I have half the Roman world," he said, swirling his wine. "Octavian has the other half, but the East is the true prize." It was in that moment I sensed an opportunity. Antony was a soldier, a man of action, but also a man with appetites, for drink, for revelry, for women. He might be manipulated if I played my cards cleverly, but I also found myself drawn to his charisma, his almost childlike humor beneath the bluster. He was not Caesar, with that cold, calculating edge. Antony was warmer, more impulsive. Dangerous, yes, but in a different way. Over the following days, we negotiated terms. He wanted funds for his campaigns, including a prospective war against the Parthians. I wanted to secure recognition of Caesarion's legitimacy as Caesar's son, and thus some share of Roman respect. I also desired territories in the Near East that historically belonged to Egypt. Each evening we feasted, engaged in witty banter, and, inevitably, ended in each other's arms. When I first lay with Antony, I felt a sense of raw vitality that was different from Caesar's measured passion. Antony could be rough, but also surprisingly tender. At last, I secured a pact. I would furnish him with troops and gold. In return, he would return to me certain territories in Phoenicia, Crete, and Cyprus that had once been under Ptolemaic control. He also agreed to safeguard my crown from any Roman attempts to undermine me. Thus began our alliance, political, but also personal. I invited him to winter in Alexandria. He accepted eagerly. Our time in Alexandria was filled with extravagance. We formed a society of inimitable livers, a group of friends who reveled nightly in banquets, masquerades, and playful pranks. Historians would later portray this as decadence, but it was also a performance of power, demonstrating to the Alexandrians that their queen could match any Roman in magnificence, and to the Romans that Antony was not to be underestimated. Still, beneath the merriment, we both knew storms loomed. Octavian was consolidating his power in the west, suspicious of Antony's dalliances in the east. My advisers grumbled that I was letting a Roman overshadow me, but I kept hold of the reins. That winter, I grew pregnant with twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Antony doted on me, showering me with playful nicknames like my Queen of Queens. My people, too, were charmed by him. He participated in Egyptian rites, marched in festivals with me, proclaiming his respect for our gods. And though the Roman perspective might have mocked such pageantry, here in Alexandria it served to strengthen my claim as Pharaoh. My city sparkled with festivities, and for a season it seemed I lived in a dream of wine, laughter, and blossoming love. But dreams end. Antony left to wage his campaign against the Parthians. It went poorly. He lost many troops and retreated in disarray. I had sent him supplies, though not as much as he demanded, for I had to safeguard Egypt's resources. He returned to me battered, physically and emotionally. I tended him, providing comfort and solace. Yet I sensed a bitterness in him, a frustration that gnawed at his pride. Octavian, meanwhile, was controlling Rome with a sure hand, sowing discord about Antony's degradation in the east under the thrall of an Egyptian temptress, me. The triumvirate was fracturing. When Antony's wife, Fulvia, died, Antony sought reconciliation with Octavian, even marrying Octavian's sister, Octavia, to heal the rift. It cut me deeply. I bristled with jealousy, but I forced myself to see the necessity of the move. Rome's game demanded such gestures. Did he truly love her? I doubted it, but the blow still stung. For a time, Antony tried to walk a fine line between us. He fathered children with Octavia, and yet he maintained contact with me. We exchanged letters, me in Alexandria, continuing my rule, bearing his children, while he in the west tried to keep the balance. But that balance could not last. Octavian grew ever more powerful. Tensions spiked again when Antony demanded land for my children. He openly recognized Caesarion as the rightful heir of Caesar. The Roman Senate bristled, seeing this as an affront to Octavian. Soon there was talk of war. At length, Antony cast his lot fully with me. He left Octavia, returning to Alexandria, publicly declaring Caesarion as Caesar's true son and distributing Roman-held territories among my children. Rome exploded in fury, or so the rumors told us. Octavian seized upon these provocations, accusing Antony of betraying Rome for a foreign witch, me. The Senate stripped Antony of his powers, effectively declaring war on Cleopatra. Not on Antony, but on me, Cleopatra. That stung like venom, but it also clarified the lines of battle. And so we prepared. Antony marshaled his legions. I outfitted our fleet, the Egyptian navy, with splendid ships. We moved to Greece establishing ourselves in Ephesus, then Actium. The final showdown approached. My children remained in Alexandria under watchful eyes, though I dreaded leaving them. Before I boarded my ship, I embraced Caesarion, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and my young son Ptolemy Philadelphus. One by one, I whispered prayers to the gods to protect them. My eyes lingered on Caesarion. Was he truly the living link between Rome and Egypt, or a child doomed by fate? I would soon discover how cruel the fates could be. War was on the horizon, and Rome's legions were vast. Still, I had faced impossible odds before. I had come out on top with Caesar, survived the intrigues of the palace, faced exile. Antony was no Caesar, but together, perhaps, we could shape destiny. Or so I dared hope. Episode 3. The year was 31 BC when the decisive conflict began. We established a stronghold near Actium, a promontory jutting into the Ionian Sea. Our forces were sizable, but supplies ran short. Disease spread in the camp. Morale wavered as Octavian's navy, commanded by the cunning Agrippa, blockaded us. Skirmishes at sea drained our resources. The Roman ships hammered our supply lines, capturing or sinking supply vessels. I urged Antony to break out, to take the fight to open water, or retreat inland to draw Octavian onto less favorable ground. But Antony vacillated. He was not the confident commander I had known. Some said his spirit was broken, that he was torn by the memory of Roman loyalties. Others claimed Octavian's skillful propaganda had eroded Antony's faith in himself. Whatever the reason, our days at Actium stretched into a nightmare of indecision. One tense morning, I spoke sharply with Antony in our command tent. "Either we attack or we retreat," I said, slamming my hand on a table piled with maps. "We cannot linger here like prey, waiting to be devoured." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "If we sail out, we risk a major engagement at sea. Agrippa's fleet is formidable. Do you propose we starve here, then? Our men are losing faith by the hour. I will not watch my kingdom's navy rot in this harbor." My voice trembled with frustration. I recalled the Cleopatra who had once stolen into Caesar's chambers in a roll of cloth, bold, decisive. Now I watched Antony, uncertain, fraying. He sighed. "We'll break through their blockade. The plan is to engage in a naval battle, but keep a path open for retreat should we fail." When the day of the battle came, we arrayed our ships in a crescent formation. I commanded the Egyptian fleet center, Antony on the right. Our standard fluttered in the wind. Drums thundered. My heart pounded with anticipation and dread. Across the water, Agrippa's lines spread wide, preparing to encircle us. Trumpets blared, and our oars stroked the sea in unison. The calm morning exploded into chaos as catapults lobbed stones, archers fired volleys, and ships rammed each other. Acrid smoke from flaming arrows choked the air. Shouts, screams, and the crash of wood against wood filled my ears. I fought to keep order, calling out commands, urging my helmsman to press forward. My galleys were heavier, designed to punch through smaller Roman vessels, but the Romans were more agile. Then, at a crucial moment, a gap appeared in Agrippa's lines, a chance to break free or to exploit the opening. I signaled Antony's flagship, expecting him to lead a decisive thrust. But in the swirl of the battlefield, confusion reigned. I saw some of Antony's leading ships begin to retreat, turning away from the fight. A ripple of panic or miscommunication spread through our ranks. Some historians would later claim I lost my nerve and led the retreat. Others say Antony panicked and followed me. The truth is more tangled. I remember seeing black smoke rising from a burning galley, hearing men crying out for reinforcements, scanning the horizon for Antony's banner. Then one of my captains shouted, "The general's flagship is turning, my queen." I looked and indeed saw his vessel's sails catching the wind, pulling away. My mind whirled. Was this a signal to withdraw, or a spontaneous collapse? In the heat of the moment, I made a fateful decision. I directed my fleet to break away, to follow Antony's presumed signal. The impetus was that we could regroup to fight another day rather than be encircled and destroyed, but a large portion of our ships, confused or blocked by the Romans, could not disengage. It became a rout. The Romans surged forward, capturing or sinking many of our vessels. I fled with Antony, our battered remnants limping southward. The sight of the burning warships behind me seared my soul. We had lost the battle and, in effect, the war. Back in the safety of a temporary haven, Antony was despondent. He barely spoke, staring at the deck, his arms trembling. "I have betrayed my men," he mumbled. I tried to rouse him, but he sank into despair, avoiding my gaze. In my own heart, grief and anger warred. We had staked everything on this battle. Now, Octavian's path to victory was clear. We sailed separately back to Alexandria. The journey was a blur of heartbreak. I looked out on the dark sea, remembering the glimmering nights of revelry Antony and I had once shared. That seemed an age ago. I knew Octavian would come for us in time, and we needed a plan. Some said we should flee east, to India, or beyond, vanish from Roman reach. But I was Queen of Egypt. I would not abandon my home to become a wandering exile. If we were to face our end, it would be on Egyptian soil. In Alexandria, I called an emergency council. I summoned generals, ministers, scribes. I reorganized defenses, prepared the city for siege. Yet even as we worked, a pall of inevitability hung in the air. Antony secluded himself in the palace, drinking heavily, occasionally rousing to oversee some fortifications, only to slump back into brooding. I tried to stir his old spirit, but it was like trying to relight a damp torch. Meanwhile, Octavian advanced methodically. One by one, the outposts and allied kingdoms fell. I sent envoys to negotiate. I offered tribute, appealed to reason. But Octavian had only one demand. He wanted me to betray Antony. Moreover, he wanted Caesarion. I suspected he planned to remove any threat to his claim as Caesar's heir. I did not trust him. My secret couriers tried to glean some arrangement. Some illusions died when I realized Octavian would never truly allow Caesarion to live as a rival to his power. As the siege of Alexandria began, my city braced for the worst. Roman legions encircled us on land, while their ships blockaded the harbor. Starvation loomed. People whispered that the gods had forsaken us. And I was weary, though I refused to show it publicly. Each day, I donned my royal attire, addressed the palace staff, inspected the ramparts, tried to exude confidence. "We will endure," I would say, offering a stoic smile. But at night I lay in bed, my mind churning with dreadful scenarios. Antony, in a desperate attempt to regain his honor, launched a small cavalry charge at dawn one day. He surprised a Roman detachment, claimed a minor victory, but it changed nothing strategic. He returned bloodied and triumphant for the moment, but illusions of turning the tide were just that, illusions. Octavian's net was too wide. When the final assault came, the city could do little. Roman eagles were seen from the palace windows, marching down the streets. Soldiers battered the gates. I realized the end was near. I rushed to fortify the royal precinct. Cleopatra's Needle, the great obelisks, stood silent witness as the Roman tide swept in. The sound of battle, shouts, clang of swords, screams, echoed across once proud Alexandria. Smoke spiraled from fires. The city was falling. I had prepared a desperate contingency, a chamber filled with tapestries, beneath which I had hidden a store of combustibles. If we had to, we would burn our own treasures rather than let Rome plunder them. I also had venomous snakes secured in baskets, for I would not be paraded in a Roman triumph. Death was preferable to that humiliation. Amid the final chaos, Antony heard a false report that I had killed myself in despair. Overwhelmed by grief and guilt, he fell on his sword. Wounded, he realized the rumor was false. Servants brought him to me, bleeding profusely. I was in a fortified tower near the palace, and with the help of loyal guards, we hoisted him up by ropes. The memory of that moment still makes my chest tighten. Antony, pale, eyes half-lidded, blood staining his armor, was carried into my arms. He managed a weak smile. "My queen," he murmured, voice faint. "They told me you. I could not live without you." I cradled his head, tears coursing down my cheeks. "You fool," I whispered, pressing my lips to his forehead. "You brave, stubborn fool." He coughed, spitting blood, and reached for my hand. "Forgive me," he rasped. "I have failed you." "Shh," I said, choking on sobs. "We failed each other. But at least you are with me now." He drew a ragged breath. "Octavian, he will show no mercy. Do not let him parade you through Rome." "Never," I vowed. "I am still Cleopatra. I will not be displayed as a trophy." Antony's gaze flickered, fading. "You are the queen of kings," he whispered. Then he exhaled, and his body went limp in my arms. I could not contain my grief. I wailed, my tears falling on his lifeless face. That was the end of Mark Antony, the man who had so briefly brought me laughter and love in the swirl of politics and war. Shortly thereafter, Octavian's soldiers gained entry to my refuge. I barred myself in my final stronghold, taking with me only a few attendants. One of them, loyal to the end, slipped me word that Octavian intended to present me in chains for a triumph in Rome. I clenched my teeth, rage burning in my heart. He would make a spectacle of me, a living trophy to validate his power, and Caesarion, my son, was in imminent danger. I had already sent him away from Alexandria, hoping to secure safe passage to India. But Roman informants would track him, I was sure. My only hope was that he might escape. Octavian requested an audience. I received him in the same chamber that I had once filled with splendor for Antony, though now it was disheveled, the furniture askew from the chaos. He entered, wearing the polished armor of a Roman victor, flanked by guards. He was young, his face smooth, but his eyes were cold and old. He assessed me with a detached curiosity, as though I were some specimen. I stood tall, regal in my despair, dressed in a simple gown, refusing to prostrate myself. "Queen Cleopatra," he said in a measured tone, "I come as a friend, offering leniency if you surrender yourself and your wealth to Rome." I lifted my chin. "I am no slave to be bartered, Octavian." He smiled thinly. "Your position suggests otherwise. The city is mine. Your ally is dead. You have no path but acceptance of Roman rule." I stared at him, letting silence weigh heavily. Then I offered a faint, serene smile. "We shall see." He tried to coax me, stating that if I cooperated, I might retain some measure of dignity. But behind his placid words, I sensed he already planned to drag me to Rome in chains. I feigned compliance, telling him I needed time to prepare. He departed, satisfied that he had intimidated me. Episode 4. Once Octavian left, I knew I had to act swiftly. I refused to be led in a Roman triumph. Better to die. My attendants, Charmian and Iras, also prepared themselves for the end. I took one last look at the city from a palace balcony. The smoke was clearing and Roman standards fluttered over the ramparts. Civilians scavenged the wreckage. The sparkling city of my youth was subdued under foreign rule. My heart felt like shattered glass. From a hidden recess, my servants brought the small basket said to contain figs. Within it lay an asp, a deadly serpent. The Egyptians revered snakes. They symbolized both royal power and the afterlife's mystery. I believed I would rejoin Antony in the next world, or perhaps be judged by the gods of the Nile. But either fate was preferable to humiliation in Roman fetters. I dressed carefully in my finest robes, adorning myself with the regalia of a queen. The diadem, golden bracelets, jewels that caught the sunlight in dazzling arcs. If I was to die, let it be as Cleopatra, not as a captive. Then I took the asp from the basket, my hand trembling slightly. The serpent coiled, hissing softly. Charmian and Iris stood by, tears on their cheeks, silent but resolute. I pressed the asp to my breast, a sharp sting on my skin. The pain was fleeting. A warm numbness spread. I let the snake drop, gasping as I sank onto a couch. The corners of my vision blurred. My limbs felt heavy. The last thing I recall clearly is the distant cry of seagulls and the faint smell of my own perfume. Charmian and Iris arranged me so that I might appear serene in death, a queen to the last breath. Octavian's men barged in moments later, so the story goes, to find me lifeless, draped in regal finery. They were too late to claim me for their triumph. They found Charmian and Iris dying as well. Octavian was furious, but what could he do? He had my corpse, yet not my submission. In his frustration, he purportedly allowed me a royal burial beside Antony. I do not know how they laid us to rest, for by then I had passed beyond mortal concerns. They say Octavian had Caesarion captured and executed not long after, confirming his place as the undisputed heir of Caesar. My other children, fathered by Antony, he took to Rome, where they were raised by Octavia. As for Egypt, it was annexed as a province of the Roman Empire. The age of the pharaohs ended with me. Yet I, Cleopatra, refused to be paraded in chains. Perhaps that final act of defiance is my lasting legacy. Those centuries would pass, stories of my cunning, my beauty, my intellect would echo through time. They would speak of my relationships with two of Rome's greatest men, of the wealth of Egypt, of tragedies beyond measure. Some might call me a seductress who bewitched great leaders, others a brilliant queen who tried to preserve her land in a world consumed by Roman conquest. In truth, I was both. I was Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, shaped by my dynasty's heritage and undone by forces greater than any single mortal can withstand. Still, on my own terms, I met my fate, leaving behind the memory of a woman who spoke many tongues, who staked everything on love and power, who refused to yield. If my story lives on, let it stand as testament to the complexities of a woman, neither saint nor demon, who fought for her throne and her people until the final breath. Episode 5. I know not how the centuries portray me now, but let me share the episodes of my life in deeper reflection. My childhood was marked by palace intrigue, the execution of my sister Berenice, my father's precarious reign. My first real taste of power came when I was 17, co-ruler with my brother husband, forced into exile, then returning with Caesar's help. In those moments, I learned that cunning and persuasion could shape empires. My bond with Caesar was more than strategic. I believed in our shared destiny. When he fell, the world shifted beneath my feet, but I adapted. In Rome, I saw how ambition and suspicion shaped the Republic. Caesar's statue in the Temple of Venus Genitrix, my presence as an Egyptian queen living in a villa, it all foreshadowed the clash of cultures that would result in bloodshed. My flight back to Alexandria after the Ides of March left me reeling but determined. I protected Caesarion, enthroned him as my co-ruler, forging alliances with any Roman general who might preserve our independence. Then came Antony. He was not Caesar, but in him I found a partner in revelry, in love, in grand designs. We soared to heights of opulence, dividing territories among our children, dreaming of an Eastern empire to rival Rome's. Yet the cost was the fury of Octavian, a more careful, more ruthless opponent. At Actium, we gambled and lost. The retreat from that naval defeat sealed our fates. The final days in Alexandria were a testament to how quickly fortunes can reverse. Once, we had been the envy of the world. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, and Antony, triumvir of Rome. Now we were besieged, scorned, deserted by allies. Antony's fatal wound in the palace tower was the last thread holding me to illusions of hope. With his death, I understood that Octavian's victory was absolute. The serpent's bite was my final act, a small but potent refusal to be mastered. In a single moment, the Roman dream of parading me in chains was snatched away. The child of the Nile went to her ancestors on her own terms. If the mortal world belongs to the conquerors, at least I claimed the realm of my own spirit. Episode 6. We come now to the end of my tale. 6 episodes in a life measured by triumphs and tragedies, loves and betrayals. Yet let me open my heart and reflect on the meaning, so that you, dear listener or reader across time might glimpse the soul behind the legends. I was never wholly Egyptian nor purely Greek. I was Cleopatra, seventh of that name, the last in the dynasty founded by one of Alexander's generals. From childhood, I watched how power was currency, how it drew alliances and betrayed them just as swiftly. To wield power was to hold a serpent by the tail, thrilling yet deadly. My father's precarious rule taught me cunning. Berenice's execution taught me that mercy is rare in royal houses. My early confrontation with Ptolemy XIII showed me the necessity of forging alliances, even if it meant placing my fate in the hands of a Roman general. From Caesar, I learned the sweep of ambition that transcended borders. He was a man possessed by destiny, believing himself favored by the gods. For a time, I believed it too. When he died beneath the daggers of men he once called friends, I realized destiny is fragile, easily broken by steel. His death taught me to rely on my own wits and resources. Rome was the pivot upon which the world turned. My arrival there as Caesar's guest revealed a city bursting with pride and prejudice. They looked upon me as an exotic queen, simultaneously alluring and dangerous. My statue in the Temple of Venus outraged them. How dare a foreign woman share space with their deities? Yet it was done by Caesar's will, and so they whispered and plotted. After the Ides of March, I fled that nest of vipers, returning to the land that birthed me. Then Antony arrived in my life like a whirlwind of energy. He was a man who lived in the moment, a soldier of fortune, possessed of a warmth that Caesar lacked. With him, I found laughter and shared indulgences, a respite from the endless burden of statecraft. But also in him, I saw the potential for an empire that might balance Rome and Egypt more equally. For a while we soared, bestowing kingdoms upon our children, imagining a new order. Perhaps we flew too close to the sun. Actium was our fall. A single battle, but it carried the weight of history. My flight from that naval catastrophe condemned us. The blame historians place on me might be unfair, but the outcome remains. We could not stand against Octavian's disciplined might and cunning. Antony's final, desperate acts in Alexandria ended in heartbreak. I tried to remain strong, but the city's downfall was unstoppable. So I chose death. Some might call it cowardly, but for me it was the ultimate refusal. I would not let my legacy be tarnished by the jeers of a Roman crowd. I would not walk chained behind Octavian's chariot in a triumph that mocked my life's work. And so, with the bite of an asp, I cheated Rome of its prize. I went to the afterlife as Egypt's last pharaoh, unbroken. In the wake of my passing, Caesarion was captured and slain. Octavian, henceforth Augustus, claimed Egypt as a province, feeding Rome with the grain of the Nile. The library that once stood as a beacon of knowledge gradually declined, though some part of it survived in various forms. My children by Antony were taken to Rome, raised by Octavia, living as curiosities or minor nobles on the fringes of the empire. And what of my memory? Over the centuries, writers and poets would paint me in various lights, a seductress, a cunning stateswoman, an embodiment of the East's allure. Shakespeare would pen lines that might capture a fragment of my essence, though never the whole. My coins might be unearthed, bearing my profile, sharp-nosed, intelligent eyes. The temples I refurbished or built in Egypt would attest to my devotion to Isis. Scholars would debate how beautiful I truly was, missing the point that my greatest asset was not mere physical appeal, but intellect, language, and willpower. Standing now beyond mortal bounds, I say this: I was neither saint nor demon, but a woman in a time of cataclysmic change, doing all I could to preserve my kingdom and my line. I loved, I lost, I negotiated. I lived with both grandeur and desperation. Perhaps that is what makes my story endure. Yes, I was Cleopatra. The world saw me end my days in the coils of an asp rather than in chains before a Roman mob. That final act, I hope, cements forever the image of a queen who would bow to no conqueror. Let it be a testament that even as the tides of empire wash away monuments and burn libraries, some stories shine through the darkness, defying oblivion. Mine is such a story, ever dramatic, ever tragic, and, in its own way, triumphant. I was the last pharaoh, and though my kingdom fell, my name echoes still across the ages. May the tale of Cleopatra remind those who hear it that even when destiny seems unalterable, the human will can still leave a mark that centuries cannot erase. We may be dust in the end, but for a time we blaze like the sun on the desert sands, proud and unyielding. I am Cleopatra. Remember me not only for how I died, but for how I lived, daring, striving, and determined to shape my own fate in a world dominated by men and empires that would have devoured me sooner had I not fought back with every breath. Thus ends my saga, told in 6 episodes from the vantage of my own heart, a heart that beat for Egypt, for love, and for the unbreakable pride of a queen.